My son Leo stood in the doorway of my workshop, his 14-year-old face twisted with the kind of righteous anger only teenagers can muster. Behind him lurked Viktor Romanov, my ex-wife's new husband, wearing that smug smile I'd grown to despise over the past 6 months. "I don't want your last name anymore," Leo announced, his voice cracking slightly. "Victor says you're a loser, and I should take a real man's name." Sarah appeared beside them, her perfectly manicured fingers resting on Victor's shoulder. The diamond ring he'd bought her caught the afternoon light streaming through my garage windows, the same windows I'd installed myself when we'd still been a family. "You heard him, Julian," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Leo's made his choice." I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on an old shop rag, taking my time. The sink I'd been fixing could wait. This moment, this betrayal, deserved my full attention. "Is that right, son?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "You want to throw away the Blackwood name?" Leo's jaw jutted out defiantly. "Victor's been more of a father to me in 6 months than you've been in 14 years. He's successful. He drives a Mercedes. He doesn't smell like sawdust and motor oil." Sarah beamed like she'd just won the lottery. Victor's chest puffed out with pride. "Fine," I said calmly, reaching into my tool chest. "But if you're going to make adult decisions, you need to do this properly." I pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping there for weeks, anticipating this moment. Inside were legal documents I'd had prepared by my attorney, documents Sarah and Victor knew nothing about. "Sign here," I said, placing the papers on my workbench and offering Leo a pen. Sarah stepped closer, squinting at the paperwork. "What is this?" "Legal name change documentation," I replied smoothly. "If Leo wants to abandon the Blackwood name, he needs to do it officially. This makes it binding." Victor nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking, Julian. Make it legal." Leo grabbed the pen eagerly and scrawled his signature across the bottom of each page. Sarah witnessed it, her smile growing wider with each stroke of the pen. "There," Leo said, throwing the pen down. "I'm done being a Blackwood." "Congratulations," I said, collecting the papers. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The smugness faltered on Sarah's face for just a moment, but Victor was already steering them toward the door. "Come on, family," Victor announced loudly. "Let's celebrate at that steakhouse downtown. My treat." They left me standing in my garage, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the life I'd built with my own hands. But I wasn't angry. I was calculating. A week later, I was installing new cabinets in Mrs. Henderson's kitchen when my phone rang. It was Charles Whitmore, the estate attorney who'd been handling Blackwood family affairs for 30 years. "Julian," his voice was tight with panic, "I just received some very disturbing paperwork from the county clerk's office." "Oh?" I continued measuring the cabinet spacing, phone wedged between my shoulder and ear. "Your son has legally changed his name. Do you understand what this means?" "Enlighten me, Charles." "The Blackwood Trust requires direct biological inheritance with the maintained family name. By renouncing the Blackwood name, Leo has forfeited his claim to the entire estate." I smiled, even though Charles couldn't see it. "How much are we talking about again?" $2.3 billion, Julian. The boy just signed away $2.3 billion. That evening, my phone rang again. This time it was Sarah, her voice shrill with panic. "Julian! What the heck did you do?" "I respected our son's wishes," I replied, cracking open a beer and settling into my recliner. "He wanted to stop being a Blackwood. Mission accomplished. The lawyer says he's lost his inheritance. That's impossible." "Actually, it's quite possible. The trust was established by my great-grandfather in 1923. Very specific language about direct biological descent and name preservation. Leo's signature made it official." The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, "You bastard, you planned this." "I planned nothing. I simply prepared for the inevitable. Victor's been poisoning Leo against me since day one. I knew it would come to this." "Fix it," she demanded. "Call your lawyer and fix it right now." "Can't do that, Sarah. Legal documents, remember? Besides, Leo made his choice. He wanted to be Victor's son. Now he is." I hung up and took a long sip of my beer. Phase 1 was complete. 3 days later, I was having lunch at Murphy's Diner when I spotted Victor's Mercedes in the parking lot of the Riverside Casino. Curious, I decided to follow up on a hunch that had been nagging me since he'd entered our lives. The casino was one of those gaudy affairs with too much neon and the perpetual smell of cigarettes and desperation. I found Victor at a high-stakes poker table, sweat beading on his forehead as he pushed chips forward with shaking hands. I watched from the bar as he lost hand after hand. The men around the table weren't the usual weekend gamblers. These guys had the look of serious players, the kind who broke kneecaps when debts went unpaid. "Your friend's in deep," the bartender commented, following my gaze. "How deep?" "Word is, he's into Kozlov for close to 900 grand. Russian outfit that runs this place doesn't mess around." 900,000. No wonder Victor had been so eager to marry into what he thought was money. I watched Victor lose his final hand and storm away from the table. As he headed for the exit, one of the Russians, a mountain of a man with gold teeth, intercepted him. "Victor," the unknown said in heavily accented English. "We need to talk." They disappeared into a back room. I finished my drink and headed out to the parking lot, where I left a note under Victor's windshield wiper. "Hope your new family's worth the debt, champ." Just the next morning, Victor showed up at my house and his usual swagger replaced by barely contained panic. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my living room. "Make yourself at home," I said sarcastically, and "cut the crap, Julian. I know you left that note." "What note?" Victor's face flushed red. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Living in this dump, pretending to be some blue-collar nobody." "I am blue-collar nobody. Bees, Sarah told me about your family, old money, hidden accounts. You're playing poor while sitting on millions." I laughed, actually laughed out loud. "Is that what she told you? That I'm secretly rich?" "She said your family has money. Big money. That's why I—" He stopped himself. "That's why you what, Victor? Married her? Turned my son against me?" His silence was answer enough. "Here's the thing," I continued, settling into my chair. "Sarah was half right. My family does have money. Had being the operative word." Victor's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean I was disowned 15 years ago after a falling out with my brother Charles. Haven't seen a dime of family money since. But Sarah never knew that. She always suspected I was hiding assets during our divorce." The color drained from Victor's face. "So when you came sniffing around, playing the successful businessman, she figured you were her ticket to the good life. And you figured she was your ticket to my supposed fortune. Quite the comedy of errors." Victor's hands clenched into fists. "You're lying." "Am I? Tell me, Victor. How exactly did you meet Sarah?" "Let me guess. You approached her at that wine bar downtown, struck up a conversation about her loser ex-husband, played the sympathetic ear." His expression confirmed everything. "The funny thing is," I continued, "Sarah was lying to you too. She told you Leo wasn't my biological son, didn't she? Figured if you thought he wasn't really a Blackwood, you'd be more willing to help turn him against me." Victor's silence spoke volumes. "Except he is my son. DNA test confirmed it last month. So congratulations, you manipulated my actual son into giving up his real inheritance based on lies from a woman who was using you to get to money that doesn't exist." Victor lunged at me, but I was ready. 15 years of construction work had kept me in decent shape, and anger made him sloppy. I sidestepped his clumsy swing and planted my fist in his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping. "Get out of my house," I said calmly. "And Victor, those Russians at the casino don't care about your family drama. You've got bigger problems than me." After he left, I called Charles Whitmore again. "I need you to do something for me," I told him. "I want to explore options for Leo to reclaim his inheritance. Julian, the trust language is very specific. Just explore it, Charles. There might be loopholes we haven't considered." That night, I drove past Sarah's house, the house I'd built for our family 5 years ago. Victor's Mercedes wasn't in the driveway. Through the windows, I could see Sarah pacing frantically, phone pressed to her ear. My own phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your stepson's husband owes us money. Maybe you help?" I deleted the message and drove home. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Charles Blackwood, my estranged older brother, stood on my doorstep wearing a $1,000 suit and his trademark condescending smile. "Hello, Julian. You're looking rustic." "Charles, what brings you to the wrong side of town?" "May I come in? We have family business to discuss." I stepped aside reluctantly. Charles surveyed my modest living room with barely disguised disgust. Quite the lifestyle you've chosen, he said, settling into my recliner without invitation. It's honest work. You should try it sometime. Charles chuckled. Still bitter about the board's decision? That was 15 years ago, Julian. You mean your decision. You orchestrated my removal from Blackwood Industries. You were unstable, unreliable. The company needed steady leadership. The company needed someone who wouldn't question your creative accounting. His smile faltered slightly. I didn't come here to relitigate the past. I came about your son. What about him? I understand he's renounced the family name. Unfortunate, but perhaps for the best. I studied my brother's face. Why would that be for the best, Charles? The trust fund was established in a different era. Modern families are complicated. Maybe it's time to modernize the inheritance structure. Modernize how? Direct the funds toward family members who've proven their commitment to the Blackwood legacy. Family members who've actually contributed to the company's success. The pieces clicked into place. You're planning a hostile takeover. I'm planning for the future. With Leo out of the succession and you having forfeited your rights years ago, the trust reverts to the company. As CEO, I have significant influence over how those funds are allocated. You son of a witch. You orchestrated this whole thing. Charles stood, brushing imaginary lint from his suit. I have no idea what you mean. Victor, you sent him after Sarah. You knew she thought I was hiding money. You used that to manipulate her into manipulating Leo. That's quite a conspiracy theory, Julian. Is it? Victor's debt to the Russians? Did you arrange that too? Make sure he was desperate enough to play along? Charles headed for the door. I think you've been reading too many thriller novels, brother. Sometimes people make poor choices all on their own. After he left, I sat in my kitchen, pieces of the puzzle finally forming a complete picture. Charles had been playing a long game, using Victor and Sarah as unwitting pawns to eliminate Leo from the succession. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. I called Charles Whitmore again. Charles, I need you to research something for me. The trust documents. Is there any provision for restoration of inheritance rights? Well, there is one clause. If a direct heir renounces the family name under duress or fraudulent circumstances, and if they're readopted by their biological parent, their rights can be restored. But, Julian, the legal hurdles, what would it require? Proof of manipulation or fraud in the original renunciation, testimony from the heir acknowledging the deception, and formal readoption proceedings. And if Leo testified that he was manipulated by Victor and Sarah, that could work. But Julian, are you sure you want to go down this road? It would mean a very public family battle. I thought about Leo, about the confused anger in his eyes when he'd signed those papers, about Sarah's smug satisfaction and Victor's desperation, about Charles's arrogant assumption that he'd outmaneuvered me. Set up the paperwork, Charles. It's time the Blackwood name meant something again. That evening, I drove to Sarah's house. The Mercedes still wasn't there, but I could see Leo through his bedroom window, hunched over his computer. I rang the doorbell. Sarah answered, her face haggard with stress. What do you want, Julian? I want to talk to my son. He's not your son anymore, remember? He chose Victor. Where is Victor, by the way? Haven't seen him around lately? Her composure cracked slightly. He's handling some business matters. Russian business matters? The color drained from her face. That's what I thought, I said. When he doesn't come back, and he won't come back, Sarah, Leo's going to have questions. When he does, give him my number. I turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Sarah, you might want to check your mortgage documents. I have a feeling Victor's been more creative with your finances than you realize. The look of dawning horror on her face was almost worth 15 years of exile. 2 days later, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Leo, his voice small and frightened. Dad, can you come get me? What's wrong? Victor's gone. Mom's crying. There are men here who say we owe them money. I was dressed and in my truck within minutes. When I arrived at Sarah's house, 2 large men in expensive suits were standing on the front porch while Sarah sobbed into her phone. Gentlemen, I said, approaching cautiously. Beautiful morning, isn't it? The larger of the 2 men turned to face me. You are Julian? Depends who's asking. We are asking about Victor. He owes money. He is not answering phone. Victor's not my problem anymore. Perhaps. But house is collateral for debt. Woman inside, she is now our problem. I glanced through the window where Leo was watching with wide, terrified eyes. How much does he owe? $890,000, plus interest. And if the debt isn't paid? The man shrugged eloquently. Give me 24 hours, I said. You pay Victor's debt? I'll handle it. After they left, I went inside. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by foreclosure notices and legal documents. He mortgaged the house, she said without looking up. Everything. The cars, the jewelry, even my mother's ring. It's all collateral. Leo sat beside her, looking younger than his 14 years. Dad, he said quietly, I think I made a mistake. I sat down across from them. We all made mistakes, son. Victor said you were a loser, that you'd never amount to anything. Maybe I am a loser, but I'm your loser if you'll have me back. Leo started crying then, real tears, not the angry posturing of a teenager. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and took his hand. We can fix this, Leo, but it's going to require you to be braver than you've ever been. Over the next hour, I explained everything to them. The trust fund, Charles's manipulation, Victor's debt, the legal options available to restore Leo's inheritance. $2 billion, Leo whispered. $2.3 billion, I corrected, but only if you're willing to testify about how Victor and your mother manipulated you. Sarah looked up sharply. Julian, you can't ask him to do that. I'm not asking him to do anything. I'm giving him a choice. The same choice he made a week ago, but with all the facts this time. Leo was quiet for a long moment. Then, what about Mom? If I testify, what happens to her? That depends on how much she knew about Victor's schemes. Sarah's face crumpled. I didn't know about the gambling, I swear, Julian. I thought he was successful. The Mercedes, the expensive dinners, I never questioned where the money came from. But you did lie to him about Leo's paternity. She nodded miserably. And you did encourage Leo to reject me. Another nod. Why, Sarah? What did I ever do to deserve that? You were content, she said finally. Content to be small. Content to work with your hands and live in this little house and never want more. I wanted more, Julian. I wanted the life I thought your family name could give us. The life you thought I was hiding from you. Yes. I looked at my son, our son, and saw my own stubbornness in his jaw, Sarah's intelligence in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Leo, if you want to reclaim your inheritance, you'll need to formally request readoption and testify about the circumstances of your name change. Sarah, you'll need to corroborate his testimony. And then we deal with the Russians, settle this mess, and figure out how to be a family again. Leo straightened his shoulders. I want to do it. I want to be a Blackwood again. Even if it means admitting you were wrong? Even if it means facing some very unpleasant publicity? Especially then. I smiled at my son, my brave, foolish, wonderful son. Then let's go reclaim what's ours. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Blackwood Industries for the first time in 15 years. The receptionist, a young woman who couldn't have been older than Leo, looked at me with polite confusion. I'm here to see Charles Blackwood, I announced. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Blackwood, Julian Blackwood? Her eyes widened. She'd obviously heard the name, though probably not in any positive context. I'll call up to his office. While she whispered urgently into her headset, I studied the lobby. The company my great-grandfather had built from nothing now occupied 40 floors of downtown's most prestigious building. The walls were lined with portraits of previous CEOs, all Blackwoods, including one of my father that Charles had somehow managed not to remove. And Mr. Blackwood will see you now, the receptionist said, her voice carefully neutral. 40th floor. The elevator ride felt like ascending into enemy territory. When the doors opened, Charles's secretary, a severe woman I remembered from my previous life, gestured toward the corner office. He's waiting for you. Charles stood behind his massive desk. City skylines spread out beyond him through floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked every inch the corporate titan. Julian, I wondered when you'd show up. Did you? How prescient of you. Please sit. Can I offer you coffee, water, something stronger? I'm not here for a social call, Charles. No. I imagine you're here about your son's unfortunate decision. I settled into the chair across from his desk. Unfortunate for who? For him, obviously. $2 billion is a significant sum to forfeit over teenage rebellion. Is that what you're calling it? Teenage rebellion? Charles's smile was razor sharp. What would you call it? I'd call it fraud, manipulation, elder misuse if we're being technical about it. That's a serious accusation. It's about to become a serious lawsuit. For the first time since I'd entered his office, Charles looked genuinely surprised. You're bluffing, am I? Leo's prepared to testify that Viktor Romanov systematically manipulated him into renouncing his birthright. Sarah's prepared to corroborate that testimony. And I have evidence linking Viktor's financial desperation to his sudden interest in our family. Charles leaned back in his chair. Evidence? Casino records, debt documentation, phone records showing Viktor's communications with certain parties who shall remain nameless for now. You're fishing. Maybe, but I'm fishing in well-stocked waters. Charles stood and walked to his windows, hands clasped behind his back. What do you want, Julian? I want my son's inheritance restored. I want Viktor prosecuted for fraud. And I want you to explain how a man drowning in gambling debts just happened to target the mother of a Blackwood heir. You're suggesting I orchestrated this? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating it as fact. Charles turned back to face me. You always were paranoid, and you always were ambitious. The difference is, paranoia sometimes pays off. We stared at each other across the office. Two brothers who'd chosen very different paths, now facing the consequences of those choices. Hypothetically, Charles said finally, if I were to acknowledge some irregularities in recent events, what would you propose as a resolution? Leo gets his inheritance. You resign as CEO. I take my rightful place on the board. Charles laughed. Actually laughed out loud. You? Run a Fortune 500 company? Julian, you haven't worn a suit in 15 years. I built this company as much as you did. More, actually, since I wasn't embezzling from the pension fund. His laughter died instantly. What did you say? You heard me. Did you think I wouldn't notice the discrepancies in the employee retirement accounts? The creative accounting that's been keeping your quarterly numbers artificially high? Charles's face went white. That's right, brother. While you were busy manipulating my family, I was busy doing what I do best, investigating problems and finding solutions. Turns out a blue-collar work ethic comes in handy when you're tracking financial irregularities. You can't prove anything, can't I? I've had a forensic accountant reviewing publicly available documents for the past month. Amazing what patterns emerge when someone actually looks for them. I stood and straightened my jacket, the same jacket I'd worn to job sites for the past 5 years. But somehow it felt like armor now. Here's what's going to happen, Charles. You're going to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. You're going to announce your resignation. And you're going to recommend me as interim CEO while the Leo situation gets resolved. And if I refuse, then I hold a press conference this afternoon. I explain how the current CEO of Blackwood Industries conspired with a compulsive gambler to defraud his own nephew out of a multi-billion-dollar inheritance. I provide documentation of your financial improprieties, and I let the SEC sort out the details. Charles slumped into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 52 years. You son of a witch. Actually, I'm your brother, which makes this whole thing even more disappointing. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Charles, the board meeting is at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. The Blackwood Industries boardroom hadn't changed much in 15 years. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs, same oil paintings of dead patriarchs watching over their corporate legacy. What had changed was the collection of faces around that table. Shareholders and board members who'd never met the prodigal Blackwood brother. I arrived at 8:45 wearing the only suit I still owned and carrying a briefcase that had gathered dust in my closet since my exile. Charles was already there, looking haggard and defeated. Gentlemen, ladies, he announced as the last board member took their seat. I've called this emergency meeting to address some recent developments regarding the Blackwood Trust and succession. Margaret Winters, the company's lead counsel, leaned forward. Charles, what developments? The trust situation seemed resolved when the boy renounced his claim. That's where things get complicated, I said, standing up. Every head in the room turned toward me. I could see the confusion, the whispered questions, the gradual recognition as older board members remembered my face. For those who don't know me, I continued, I'm Julian Blackwood, Charles's younger brother, former board member, and father of the boy in question. The whispers grew louder. Julian, Margaret said carefully, you were removed from this board 15 years ago. I was, but circumstances have changed. My son was manipulated into renouncing his inheritance through fraud and coercion. I'm here to rectify that situation. Board member Harrison Polk, a man I remembered as one of Charles's allies, spoke up. That's a serious accusation, Julian. It's about to become a serious lawsuit. I opened my briefcase and distributed copies of documents I'd prepared, legal filings, financial records, testimony from Leo and Sarah. What you're looking at is evidence that Viktor Romanov, acting on behalf of parties unknown, systematically targeted my family to eliminate my son from the line of succession. Margaret scanned the documents quickly. These are quite detailed. They're also accurate. Viktor owed nearly $1 million to a Russian gambling syndicate. He married my ex-wife under false pretenses, believing she could lead him to the hidden Blackwood assets. He then manipulated my 14-year-old son into legally renouncing his birthright. And you're suggesting Charles was involved? This from Robert Chen, the newest board member. I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it as fact. Charles finally spoke up. Julian, you're making wild accusations based on phone records, I interrupted, financial documents, testimony from multiple witnesses, and this. I pulled out a final document and slid it across the table to Margaret. What is this? She asked. It's a forensic accounting report detailing systematic embezzlement from the company pension fund over the past 3 years. Embezzlement that totals approximately $47 million. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions, demanded explanations, accused each other of negligence. Through it all, Charles sat in his chair like a statue, staring at the documents that would end his career. Order! Margaret shouted, banging her pen against the table like a gavel. Order, please. The room gradually quieted. Charles, she said, her voice deadly calm. Do you have a response to these allegations? Charles looked around the table at faces that had once respected him, at people who'd followed his leadership for over a decade. I resign, he said quietly. Charles, Harrison began, I resign effective immediately. Julian was right about the financial irregularities. He was right about Viktor. He was right about everything. The admission hung in the air like smoke. There's more, I said, not willing to let him off easily. The manipulation of my son wasn't just about eliminating him from succession. It was about consolidating control of the trust under Charles's authority as CEO. With Leo out of the picture and me having forfeited my rights years ago, the trust assets would have reverted to company control. $2.3 billion, Margaret whispered. Exactly. Enough to cover the pension fund shortfall and still leave plenty for creative accounting. Robert Chen leaned back in his chair. Jesus Christ, Charles. You destroyed a family for money? I was protecting the company, Charles said, but his voice lacked conviction. You were protecting yourself, I corrected. The company would have survived. Your reputation wouldn't have. Margaret stood up. I'm calling security. Charles, you need to leave immediately. Julian, we need to discuss interim leadership and the legal ramifications of... The boardroom doors burst open. 2 men in expensive suits entered, followed by a flustered security guard. Sorry, folks, the larger man announced in accented English. We are looking for Julian Blackwood. My blood ran cold. The Russians had found me. I'm Julian, I said, standing slowly. We have message from Viktor. He says you will pay his debt. Viktor's mistaken. The man smiled, revealing gold teeth. Perhaps. But Viktor, he is very convincing when motivated properly. Margaret grabbed her phone. I'm calling the police. Police, Goldteeth said, his hand moving inside his jacket. This is private business matter. The boardroom had gone dead silent. 15 of the most powerful people in the city sat frozen while 2 Russian enforcers conducted business in their sanctuary. Viktor owes money, Goldteeth continued. Viktor says family will pay. You are family, yes? Viktor's not family anymore. But Boy is family. Boy who signed papers. My heart stopped. What papers? Goldteeth pulled out a document and placed it on the conference table. It was a loan agreement bearing Leo's forged signature. Viktor, he is very creative with documents. Boy now owes money too. I stared at the forgery, rage building in my chest like a furnace. That signature is fake. Perhaps, but Boy is real. Boy is at house with mother, yes? The threat was unmistakable. How much? I asked. 1 million, round number. I don't have $1 million. Goldteeth gestured around the boardroom. But you have family business. Very successful family business. Margaret found her voice. You can't be serious. This is extortion. This is debt collection, Goldteeth corrected. Very legal in Russia. I looked around the table at the board members, people who'd just learned that their CEO was a criminal, that their company was built on embezzlement, that their newest member was being threatened by the Russian mob. Give me 24 hours, I said. 12 hours. Done. Goldteeth nodded and headed for the door. 12 hours, Mr. Blackwood. Do not disappoint. After they left, the boardroom remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Margaret spoke. Julian, what the heck have you gotten us into? I've gotten us into the truth, I replied. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I spent the rest of that day liquidating everything I owned. The house, the truck, my tools, even my father's watch. Everything went toward raising the $1 million that would keep Leo safe. By evening, I was broke but not beaten. I had one final card to play. I called Charles Whitmore and asked him to meet me at Sarah's house with the readoption papers. Then I called Leo. Son, I need you to trust me one more time. What's happening, Dad? We're going to fix this. All of it. But I need you to be strong for just a little longer. When I arrived at Sarah's house, the street was lined with news vans. Word of the boardroom confrontation had leaked, and reporters were circling like vultures. Inside, Sarah was packing frantically while Leo sat on the couch, looking shell-shocked. They know where we live, Sarah said without preamble. Those Russian men. They've been calling all day. It's going to be okay, I said. But first, we need to make this official. Charles Whitmore spread the readoption papers across the kitchen table. These documents will legally restore Leo as your son and heir. Combined with his testimony about Victor's manipulation, it should be sufficient to reinstate his inheritance rights. Leo picked up the pen with hands that shook slightly. Dad, what if this doesn't work? Then we'll figure out something else. But Leo, once you sign these papers, you're a Blackwood again. All the responsibility that comes with that name, the good and the bad. I understand. He signed his name carefully, each letter deliberate and clear. Sarah witnessed the signature, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. We all made mistakes, I said. What matters is what we do next. My phone rang. It was Margaret Winters. Julian, the board has reached a decision. We're prepared to offer you interim CEO position while the inheritance situation is resolved. The salary should be sufficient to handle your immediate financial obligations. How sufficient? $2 million annually plus performance bonuses. I looked at my son, my legally restored son, and smiled. I accept. The next morning, I walked into Blackwood Industries as its new CEO. The first item on my agenda was a press conference to address the recent upheaval. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the assembled reporters, my name is Julian Blackwood, and I'm here to clean house. Over the next hour, I explained everything. Charles's embezzlement, Victor's manipulation, the systematic fraud that had nearly destroyed my family and compromised the company's integrity. The previous CEO has resigned and will face criminal charges. The pension fund will be restored to full value within 60 days. And the Blackwood Trust will continue as originally intended, supporting future generations of the family that built this company. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Blackwood, what about the Russian syndicate that threatened your son? That matter has been resolved through proper legal channels. Viktor Romanov has been arrested on fraud and forgery charges. The gambling debts he incurred are his responsibility alone. What I didn't mention was the private conversation I'd had with Goldteeth the previous evening. It turned out that Russian businessmen, even criminal ones, had a healthy respect for legitimate corporate power. A new CEO with access to billions of dollars in assets was someone worth negotiating with. The debt had been settled for a fraction of its original amount, with the understanding that Victor would face consequences for his deception on both sides of the law. After the press conference, I found Leo waiting in my new office. So this is really happening? He asked, looking around at the mahogany and leather that would someday be his. This is really happening. Dad, I don't know if I'm ready for all this responsibility. I put my hand on his shoulder. Son, a week ago, you were ready to throw away the most important thing our family has, our name. Now you're worried about being worthy of it. That tells me you're already more ready than you think. He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. Besides, I continued, you've got time to grow into it. The trust doesn't transfer until you're 25. That gives us 11 years to make sure you understand what it means to be a Blackwood. What does it mean? I looked out the window at the city my great-grandfather had helped build, at the skyline that bore our family's mark in steel and glass and determination. It means you never give up. It means you protect the people who depend on you. And it means that sometimes, when people try to take what's yours, you fight back with everything you've got. Leo nodded solemnly. I understand. Good. Now, how about we go home? Your mother's making dinner, and I promised her we'd try to be a family again. As we walked out of the office together, Leo asked, Dad, what happened to Uncle Charles? He's going to face justice for what he did. The FBI arrested him this morning. Do you feel bad about it? I considered the question as we waited for the elevator. I feel bad that it came to this. I feel bad that greed made him forget what family means. But I don't feel bad about protecting you and restoring what was rightfully yours. The elevator arrived, and as the doors closed behind us, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. For the first time in 15 years, I looked like a Blackwood again. Dad, Leo said as we descended toward the lobby. Yeah? Thank you. For fighting for me. For believing I was worth it. Son, you're worth everything. Don't ever forget that. The elevator opened onto the bustling lobby of Blackwood Industries, where employees and visitors hurried about their business, unaware that they'd just witnessed the restoration of a dynasty. As we walked toward the exit, Leo straightened his shoulders and lifted his chin. He was learning to carry the weight of his name. And I was learning that sometimes, the best revenge is simply reclaiming what was always yours.